Strasser. I've lived in the city of Delphi since 1972. Have been involved with the street department for about 10 years. Was on the city council prior for 8 years and was mayor for 8 years. I'm married, have 3 children. My wife of 42 years, and we have 3 grandchildren. Actually, one of our children has actually come back and actually teaches and coaches here at the high school, which is kind of exciting for us to have them back home. Besides my 20-some years at the city of Delphi, I've been involved in area plan zoning board of appeals for in excess of 15 years. Been involved with professional organizations, Indiana LTAP and Indiana Street Commissioners Association, as well as others. My knowledge, I think, the transition that we're going through right now here in the community, especially at the government stage, just offering myself and my knowledge to actually be on the council as we transition to an entirely new council.
Anita?
So I'm not originally from Delphi, but I've been active in the community for 15 years. I'm from Evansville. Graduated from Boise High School in 1964, which makes 55 years ago, but who's counting those? Then was on to Indiana University, where I graduated with a degree in English literature. I moved to Oregon after that and worked for the Oregon State Library, Oregon State University Library for a couple of years before getting a fellowship to go back to grad school and getting a master's degree in library information science. So I hadn't lived in the East yet, so I accepted a position to work at Farley Dickinson University in Teaneck, New Jersey, and was there for about a little bit more than a year. And it was then that I got a call from a former IU roommate, Bonnie Maxwell Davis at the time, about a job opening at an educational and publishing company in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where she'd been working. That company was then known as University Microforms International. It was soon part of the Xerox Corporation, and after that, Bell & Howell Corporation. So I moved from a first-line supervisor over the years to become, in 1983, its first female vice president. And when I left there in 1987, I was vice president and general manager of UMI's Dissertation Information Service, with full P&L responsibility for a $50 million business and a staff of about 100. So in late 1987, I moved to Evanston, Illinois, became president of Cinebooks, which was a publisher of a motion picture guide and database. And after 18 months, the Australian owner of that company said, you know, we're going to divest. So it then became my responsibility to find a buyer for the company. And that's where I came into contact with Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, North American Publishing Division, which ended up buying our company. So I was on contract there for about 6 months before, during the transition period, and then moved from Chicago area to get another location, this time in the New Albany, Louisville area, where I was a consultant for library services and also became a consultant for small businesses, helping them with marketing and strategic planning. So in 2005, Bonnie Maxwell and I moved to Delphi, where we have both been very active as community volunteers. As most of you know, I was heavily involved in the Delphi Preservation Society's push to restore the Delphi Opera House to a working performing arts venue. I also was active in other organizations in the county, like Leadership Carroll County, Delphi Main Street, other not-for-profit organizations, and ad hoc groups like the Steering Committee to revise the Carroll County Comprehensive Land Use Plan, and the Stellar team that brought more than $20 million of investments to Delphi area beginning in 2012. Currently, I serve on the boards of both Delphi Opera House Inc. and Delphi Preservation Society. I'm a member of the Delphi Redevelopment Commission and Vice President of the Area Plan Commission. So I'm running for City Council because I love this community and I want to see it continue the growth that has been achieved, and hope that my experience might be useful in this regard.
Yeah.
I want to take a minute to thank the Comet for affording us this opportunity to be here this evening, and thank you to the interested attendees this evening. I'm a lifelong resident of Delphi, minus a few years of working in Ohio, where I taught in a junior high school. I have a son, Jameson, who is a senior in high school this year at Delphi. I currently teach first grade at Delphi Elementary, and that is where my heart is with kids. It's much easier to speak in front of a group of kids than it is with adults. But that's where my passion lies, and that's one of the reasons I chose to step out and take this opportunity, because I want to create a legacy for our youth. And I have pretty much a three-pronged approach that I'd like to use to do that. I'd like to see a permanent solution to our water situation. I'd like to work towards economic development for our town, and also bring some fiscal responsibility to the city of Delphi. I think that's all I want to say right now.
Okay, so, you want to bring a permanent solution to the water issue and fiscal responsibility to the city. How would you do that if you were elected?
I think with the water solution, I think the fact that we have bonded millions of dollars over the past 8 years, and we're looking at another significant water bond, that what we're doing may not be the most permanent solution, and I think some kind of a groundwater treatment plant. I've spoken with the clerk from Flora. I know that the city, or the governor just, please keep your opinions to yourself and don't be rude. Okay? The governor released some money out of the state surplus so that small communities could work together to fix problems like what we are experiencing here in Delphi. The money is going to be offered in financial assistance and grants. I'm not saying that we have to go to Flora, but I know that the town of Flora is willing to work with us if that would ever be an option. I believe that if we look at creating a groundwater treatment plant, that could be a permanent solution for the city of Delphi. The way we're going with our current debt load, it's going to be 2050 before most of that debt is retired. I have a teenage son. I don't want him to have to bear that burden. I work with 6 and 7-year-olds. I don't want them to have to bear that burden. If it's possible to create a solution, and I'm not saying I have the answers, but I'm willing to work with council members to look for the answers, to go to other small communities like ours that have been in the same situation, to do the research, to find the information. Because I believe that we can do better by our youth.
Thank you. Anita, you said that, and I have to paraphrase because it's kind of going fast, that you want to see things continue to go in the way that they have gone, I believe. How would you try to get that done if you were sitting on the city council?
So I think one of the key things that was touched on by some of the other candidates is that if we have a negativity in the community that I think holds us back, and also which creates a view of us from outside that is just not the way we want to see ourselves. And it's not that, we want to be Pollyanna and say everything's cool here when we know we have issues, but we also need to be able to promote our accomplishments and celebrate what we have achieved. Becoming a stellar community was really a stellar achievement for this small town, bringing the tremendous investments that occurred, the facade restorations that returned the upper story windows and eyes in our buildings that really gave us something, I think, to be proud of. The restoration of the Opera House, housing redevelopment or owner-occupied, all of the projects that occurred, the streetscapes. You know, our community, as people come in, they're looking around and saying, how did you accomplish this? You know, we're really a beacon for other communities. We want to replicate what we've done here. And I think we first need to celebrate that and then build on that, working together as a community, as a team, getting the resources, perhaps reestablishing our Main Street organization, getting that community development director who can help us to focus on grants and community development within the city for bringing new business in. Those kinds of things that will help to take us to the next level.
Thank you. Randy, I think you said that you wanted to be on the council to help with the transition because there won't be any experience there next year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that kind of what you said? Yeah. So what would that look like, helping with that transition in your, what do you think?
I think going back to 1987, when I first started with the city, so I've dedicated a big portion of my life to the city, not just through public works and city council, but 37 years on the fire department. And during those period of times, water has always been at the forefront. Ever since Indiana Packers has come in, we've known, and USA has started to do the mining on the north end of town, we've known that there's a competition for the water. So that's not an easy task, and I sat on the council, I was in public works, and as mayor, I actually ended up seeing that we've got to have the council and the mayor on the same page. They have to be on the same page because this is a long-term issue and an expensive issue, and it has to be dealt with. It should have been dealt with 25 years ago. And now that it wasn't dealt with 25 years ago, now we're at the crest of where we actually have to do something right now. So my goal would be to work with the mayor, work with the department heads, and come up with a long-term plan on water and wastewater utilities, understanding what the needs are from a housing standpoint, understanding what the needs are going to be from a business, and from the industrial side, what the needs are going to be for water and wastewater on those. Those are things that you have to plan for. Successful communities, small and large around the state, have 10 and 20-year plans. They plan their work and they work their plan. It's as simple as that, and you have to understand what those costs are up front so you can actually work that down over 20 years. We just went through that. When I was mayor, we just went through that. Our financial people asked if we wanted to start that process back about year one, and the council decided that no, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to go with more of a short-term solution. So my goal would be to work with the mayor, work with the city council, department heads, understand what our needs are, and then be able to put a financial solution to that and be able to build those out, especially for the utilities. If we're going to be successful for housing and if we're going to be successful for economic development with business and industry.
Okay. Does anyone have a question for these three? Okay, I do. If you would hear that the city of Delphi has a significant surplus of tax dollars, much more than what the state recommends, what does that tell you? What does that mean to you? And do you think it's worth discussing? Anita?
So, if that is the case, then it means that you have a healthy reserve, and that when you have issues that arise, such as a water crisis where you may need to match for certain funds, or where you may need to advance dollars towards a program that will be bonded, that you've got a reserve in which you can rely on to help with that. I also think if there is that pool of money, that you could look at, as Randy was talking about, as you're developing your long-term goals and plans for the community, and you know that you have a pool of dollars available, then you might plan on how you would use some of those dollars to push those plans into fruition. But that means really involving the entire community and assessing where we are and what those next level items might be, and then having healthy discussions of what we want to do and where we want to go, and who we want to be in 5 years and 10 years, and what resources we're willing to spend to get us there.
So does that mean that you believe in a significant bank account for the city? Surplus bank account?
All cities are required to have some reserves,
Yes.
some rainy day funds.
Yes. This is much, I'm thinking much more.
If we had much more than that, then it probably means that we may have been too fiscally conservative, and perhaps need to, again, if we're trying to grow the community, look for ways in which we can take our community to the next level, and we have resources available, then I'm not saying spend it down, but let's develop a plan that takes into consideration how those dollars might best be used to still keep a very solid and healthy reserve for the down times, but yet take us toward a future that we all want.
Gail?
I know that the latest, or a year ago, the mayor's report stated that most communities had about 30% of their operating budget in reserve, and at that time Delphi had 213%. I'd like to see some of that money be expended to pay down our debt.
Okay. Randy?
A question for you, Debbie. Unless legislation has changed, I think there's supposed to be a minimum
There is.
of 6 months, and there's not a maximum on that.
Yes.
And I agree too.
Something.
I may be a Democrat, but I'd like to be fiscally conservative on what we do at the city. And we do have, I think, a significant budget, but the city got there because of common sense. We became efficient with some of our services and everything, and by having everybody working together, we've been able to build that. But I think the key to the whole thing is, if you're gonna have that kind of a reserve, we're the third group up here tonight, and every one of the groups before us talked about the things that we need. We need housing, we need jobs, we need this, we need that. So being able to use some of those funds to leverage new development, so it impacts your assessed value. So you may be spending $2 or $3 million to help with the development, but in turn you may end up leveraging that into $5, $10, or $15 million, which actually ends up more taxes that actually end up coming back. So I think there's some things that we could do. You may be able to do tax abatements with businesses, housing tax abatements. So if you do that, you're going to tie some of that budget up, or some of that revenue up, and not collect that over a period of years. If you do some of those tax abatements, some of that ends up going back to some of the conversation we had earlier tonight about what we do with housing. So some of our older housing stock, legislators in the last 4 or 5 years have actually put together some legislation that actually allows older homes where you can do tax abatement on housing, same way with new developments and everything. So if you're gonna have it, let's leverage it so we actually have this more beneficial for the city and actually drives the tax rate down.
Anybody with a question? Because I can keep going. If elected, how do you plan to communicate with your constituents? Especially including those that don't have computers, don't use Facebook. How would you communicate with those constituents, to find out anything? Randy?
Well, I think number one, you have to go out and you have to find out what your constituents or what the residents, where is it they get their communications? Are you getting it off of TV? Are you getting it off the newspaper? Are you getting it off the internet? Are you getting it at the coffee shop? So be able to find out, number one, where people are actually, where it's convenient for them to get their information. Going back several years ago, we used to have, the city used to have actually put out a quarterly report that actually communicated and went out to all the citizens. But that's when we had a full-time community development director too. So I think there's things that we can do to fit all of the needs. I think social media is a big thing. If you're gonna be communicating with the young folks and the trendy folks that we want to be able to come in, you're gonna have to go with social media. And I think there's public meetings, have some public meetings, but, I've been involved with the city for 30-some years, and through my job, in going to county commissioners meetings, county council meetings, city and town boards, you don't get a good representation when you have town hall meetings. You're gonna get some people there, so I think you've gotta find out all the different avenues, how you can actually get to those people, whether it's through the press or through the internet.
Dale? How do you feel about
I think at one time, it was very effective when our city used an all-call system, similar to what the schools use, where the residents were part of a dialing system that just went out with a message from the clerk's office and let them know about if there was gonna be a change in trash pickup, or if there was gonna be something that they needed to be aware of, and that could be an effective means of letting people know that there's going to be a public meeting. I think there's value in walking into the nursing home and sitting down with the elderly people. There's a lot of wisdom there. I think there are means with telephones today, just sending out text messages and letting people know that if they're interested, and again, the local newspaper is a valuable tool for that.
Anita?
Well, I think it's a challenge, for sure. You can't beat, just, hitting the pavement and talking to your neighbors and, creating opportunities when you're meeting someone on the street to solicit their opinions and ideas about what's happening in town. And that's certainly an important part of the mix. Not everyone is on social media, as you pointed out, but it still is a key avenue to reach a large part of our town and a large part of the city. Certainly, articles in the newspaper would be another way. Quarterly communication from the mayor's office, from the city government would be another way that certainly has been used in the past. But I don't think you can beat that face-to-face contact and finding opportunities and ways to create situations where you can talk one-on-one with your constituents, where they feel comfortable to call you or get in touch with you about an issue that they might have, and to create perhaps maybe not a town hall, but opportunities where particular issues, communities might, advisory boards might come together representing different parts of the city to kind of discuss ideas, and then those individuals take those ideas back to their neighborhoods and talk to their neighbors about it, and that pretty soon you've got a pretty good pool of people that are having input into developing solutions for problems. And, but, you know, face-to-face communication has to be an important part of that.
How much should the public, how much time should the public have to speak at council meetings? If you were elected, what do you expect? What do you expect to limit the public input? Not? Anita, why don't you go?
Well, I think you certainly want to have input from the public, and, but you also, the purpose of a council meeting is to conduct the business of the city. So there has to be a balance there. Obviously, sometimes there are public hearings, and those are definitely for the purpose of getting input from the public. But at each council meeting, I think there needs to be some time set aside for input from the people who attend those meetings. I wish there were interactive ways so that we could get people who might be on a live feed from their home who haven't come down to the meeting and see what they have to say about it too. And perhaps that's an opportunity down the road. What I would hate to have happen is for it has to be done in a measured way so that we're not just so often. I've attended an awful lot of city council meetings of late over the last year and a half or so, and one of the reasons that I'm running is because those public sessions can become very disrespectful, and we have differences and we need to air them, but we can do that in a way that recognizes that we're still neighbors and we're still in the same hood here, same neighborhood, and we can be respectful of one another and still have differences of opinion. And I would like to see our public input sessions kind of embrace that idea of respect and civility.
How do you bring that about?
Yeah, I think you set the tone, number one, and you set expectations. And, you know, you set time limits if it becomes necessary to. But really setting the tone from the council and mayor as a group, as a team, can do, I think, an amazing amount to change the tone of the meeting again.
Randy?
Well, I think a continued open door, as long as I've been involved under 4 mayors, I've never known any one of the 4 mayors, including myself, not to be available after hours, any time of the day. So continued open door. I think one of the things that really needs to happen is we need to educate our public on, if they expect to communicate that there's an issue, I don't care whether it's a pothole, a water main break, a dog or a cat that's running loose, if there's a concern by somebody, they need to know that they can contact somebody right away and get that concern taken care of. The city council is the legislative portion of the government, so we're there to actually approve budgets and ordinances, and we're there to listen as well too. But a lot of these are day-to-day operational type things that people can walk into the mayor's office, they can make a phone call to the clerk's office or the department head, and they can get these taken care of. The problem that we end up with is that we come to city council meetings to grandstand and get away from civility. That happens here. I have been in other meetings in other parts of the state, and typically the most successful one that I've seen is where when the council actually passes the agenda for tonight, is that if there are people there that have comments on the agenda itself, they can make agenda comments. And then at the end of the meeting, they actually have public comment as well too, if there are concerns. only one time, and I really get envious of other communities where they actually have people that come in giving public comment, where it's not a screaming match or a debate about what color this is or what color that is, or he said, she said, things like that. So those need to be taken care of with the mayor's office or with the department head or both, because so many of the things that come to the council ends up being operational things that can be taken care of immediately during the daytime or within 24 to 48 hours.
Gail?
I think the public needs to know that if they wish to speak on any kind of agenda item or even any item of concern, they have the right to contact the mayor's office and the clerk's office and ask to be put on the agenda to speak. And then they become an agenda item. I like what a school board does. They typically ask and tell people at the beginning of a meeting, if you wish to speak on any agenda items, you need to raise your hand and be recognized now. Because when that agenda item comes up, that will not be the time for you to blurt out or speak out or request to be recognized. You do that prior to the meeting, you set the tone, you keep order, and then at the end, you have your public comments. And I think people need to understand that they might have an opportunity to speak, but that doesn't always mean they're going to get feedback right then and there.
Okay. Talking about funding projects and getting those together, should quotes or bids be received before beginning a project or a different phase of the project? Or is it okay to stay with the same vendor and engineer, specialist, attorney, over and over again, year after year? Sorry.
I think in general, it is good to get competitive bids for service contracts or certainly for construction or other types of contracts. In some cases, there may be reasons to have an ongoing relationship or a multi-year contract with a particular engineering company or law office that is, working with the city. But certainly for specific projects, I think it's essential to have competitive bids.
Gail?
Absolutely, it's necessary before you start a project, I believe, to have bids so that you know what to budget, what to plan for. So I would say yes.
And Randy?
You're right in my wheelhouse, Debbie. For the last 4 years, I've been working for an engineering firm, so I understand. So you have to separate, are you talking about professional services as far as civil engineering? Or are you talking about contractors that are actually performing construction projects?
No, not contractors, because I think mostly there are competitive bids for them. So I'm talking about more professional services, engineering.
Professional services.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, I think what you have to do is you have to go back to understand where your funding's coming from to pay for those professional services. If you're getting funding through OCRA, Federal Highway, NDOT, you're gonna have to go through a bidding process to actually go through a selection process for those. If it's going to be done with local funds, then those are things that I would hope that we would look at qualifications of firms that, depending on the project you're gonna be doing, you're gonna look at qualifications, not only look at those qualifications, but follow up and contact other people that have used those on certain projects. Some professional services firms will be a little bit stronger in water or wastewater, some may be stronger in transportation, others may be stronger in environmental. So you want to make sure that you know that you've got the right fit for professional services people, but you have to understand where the funding is coming from to actually pay for those. If they're coming out of local funds, you can do the selection with yourselves. If you're using other funds, then there's a selection process the state and feds make you go through. And I do believe that it's good to be able to have more than one firm on board. I do understand too that there's institutional knowledge especially people that have been working with water or wastewater for a long period of time. There's institutional knowledge that they have that if you toss one firm in the trash and you hire another firm, then to recreate that knowledge that that firm actually has, you're gonna pay to actually replace that knowledge too.
Okay, thank you. And although, it is not for statute that the water and wastewater department have budgets, they're not required by the state to have budgets. Do you believe that there should be a budget for you know?
I know that the State Board of Accounts does not require that, but I also know that there's Indiana code that requires the mayor to sit down with even with those department heads and create an estimated budget. And I think that's an important avenue to structure your office to be responsible. I think it would be helpful, and I think that we need to take a look at where some of those departments are at the end of the year financially. But I know it's not required, and I know that our current administration has said that's not gonna happen. So, but as a city council member, we can request that, we can ask for it, but since it's not required, it's probably not gonna happen. But I would say, yes, it would be necessary.
Okay. And you said something about sitting down at the end of the year and reviewing. Would that be something the council would do?
I think it would be important. You can look at the detailed appropriation histories and see where the departments end at the end of the year and how much they're in the black, how much they're in red, and I think that's valuable information for planning ahead, and that could be very beneficial for planning a budget for the next year.
Anita, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that there is, in fact, a budgeting process in those departments, even though it's not a tax-funded operation that has to be, vetted in a public manner with the budget cycle.
You believe there are budgets for those?
I believe that there are internal budgets, certainly, for how much money you'd like to collect from your user fees and what what your expenses are going to be. What are your income and expenses, basically your income and outflow. So that's about it for a minute.
We had silent crossings for a minute.
I know. Certainly, I think it would be beneficial for the council to work with the mayor and department heads to get an idea of what their typical flow of the user fee income and the expenses for the departments, what type of long-range plans they have for pipe replacement or valve replacement, for example, in water, or those kinds of things. But again, it's our job to be the fiscal agents for the city. It's not our job to micromanage. And so in understanding the general picture and being comfortable that we have good people in place who are taking care of their departments is essential.
I have to agree with Anita. With the inception of long-term planning, 5 and 10 year plans laid out, with the cost of not only the operations, but the cost of maintenance and replacement items in water and wastewater fields, and especially as you start looking at capital improvements, when you start looking at new well fields and water towers and the cost of maintaining water towers, 5 and 10 year plans are I mean, it's just a normal for any utility right now, or any of the ones that I'm familiar with. So when you get 5 and 10 year plans out there, you know ahead of time what those costs are going to be. Now, it may not be as laid out as the budgeting process is for our tax dollars. But the utilities know, number one, they typically know what their electrical expenses, all of the utilities that they're gonna be using. But when you get into the long-term planning, you also, at that point in time, you start talking about replacement items and things like that. So you have that out in front of you, you know what your actual expenditures are gonna be for that year. And yeah, you're gonna have some miscellaneous things that are gonna come up during the year that you hadn't expected. That's why you set those capital outlays back to be able to cover things like that. So, I've been involved for 30-some years, and I can go back to the days of Nancy Cripe and Harold Sprague and people like that, that council members have to be engaged with department heads and the mayor, especially the mayor. He's gonna be the one that's overseeing all of those in the Board of Works, so they know what's going on. So you need to be able to come in and sit down with that mayor to understand what's actually happening, and not to give direction or anything, but give support, so they know they're doing the right thing. And that's how you have, on the backside of it, you have knowledge about what's going on. So utilities are gonna be part of the Board of Works. The council is gonna get involved in those when there's bond issues or loans that actually have to be approved, and those are done by ordinance. So I think budgets, or the budgeting process, it doesn't have to be as formal as being able to put the budget together like we do with the tax dollars, but there needs to be a budgeting process that really needs to be involved in. I've known everybody has used that in the past.
Anita, what sets you apart from your opponents? Because only one of you can win.
I'm taller.
Yeah.
So I'm not taller.
Okay. Why should people vote for you?
I think all of you can see that you have excellent choices from the three different groups that have been on here. And whether you vote for me, or Gail, or Randy, or Sandy, or Mike, and Kevin, and who else am I missing? Yeah. You know, you're gonna get someone who cares about what and cares about the city. I think what sets me apart is that I haven't lived here my entire life. I chose to live in Delphi, and frankly, it was the best decision that I think I ever made in my life. I love the community, I have a passion for it. I think I've shown over the course of several, or at least a decade and a half, a commitment to the community, to making it better. I've attended many council meetings, and feel that they can become a better vehicle to help move the city forward, and to become a really strong team that can set a goal. If you set a goal and you have a team working towards that, and you have you know, that spirit of trying to achieve something, it's awfully hard to stop it. So I would like to be a part of that team. And, you know, I think a passion for the community, but I believe we all do. So I'd like for you to vote for me, but I don't think you can go wrong with any candidacy that is.
Gail, what about you?
I do have a heart for the city, I do have a heart for the youth, and I want for them to have a better life than what we have. We always strive for the next generation to have a little bit better, a little bit more. I do have a plan to bring some economic development to the city. There were some gentlemen that came here about 11 years ago and created a plan for our Economic Development Corporation at the time, and They really drove home to hit the agribusiness and the agro-processing, because that's the heart of our community. And to go out and recruit some businesses that are suppliers to places like IPC and our agribusiness in the county and not just in the city, to bring jobs, to bring work, to bring tax revenue. I've done a lot of research through the EPA website. I've done research on a lot of things. I've made contacts with people in other towns. I feel like I'm an information person. If I don't know the answer, I can usually figure out where to get it or who to go to, and I think that's a valuable asset.
Okay, and Randy?
Well, I guess I bring the knowledge of 30-some years being involved here in the city of Delphi and my passion. I've left better paying jobs to come to work for the city 2 different times. And that's been a sacrifice for me and my family. But at the end of the day, 4 years ago, when we were actually able to see the things that we've been able to transform in the downtown, the Opera House, the things I've been involved with at the Walmashinary Canal, and the things that those actually bring to this community. I think the networking that I have with other communities across the state to give me a different perspective of what other people are doing, and that's very achievable here in our own community. I saw that with Stellar. I've seen it with planning operations and things like that, planning processes that we've done. That can happen, and I think I bring a common sense perspective of it. When I ran for mayor 8 years ago or 12 years ago, how long ago that's been, the first thing I said was, I'm not a politician. I'm a public servant, and I enjoy the community. I love seeing good things happen in the community. I network constantly with the gravity of this region, which is Lafayette, Tippecanoe County, and West Lafayette. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn in partnering, not only with those other communities, but also with the communities that we have here in the county. I think it's time to lay down our R's and D's and O's and everything else and start holding hands. If we have to sing Kumbaya, let's sing Kumbaya. But it's time that we all get back to a civil way of living and have common goals to work forward to. The water issue isn't going to go away. And there's only 1 or 2 good answers for that. So being upset and being unruly about things like that isn't going to get us any place. We need to work together on that and work with other communities in our region.
Okay, one last question before December. What's your philosophy of government? More is better, less is best. More is better, oh yeah, that's awesome. Caleb, sorry.
I think what we have for our city government is efficient. We have enough elected officials that cover the city. So everyone has a voice, everyone has some representation. I don't believe that we need more codes. I believe we need to enforce the codes that we have.
Okay, Anita?
So I don't think it's really a question of more government or less government, but rather smart government. And that means taking the resources that we have and using them effectively. I do think that we have to have code enforcement our first responsibility is for the health and safety of our citizens. And to not enforce building codes, to not enforce unsafe properties is really not doing our job. So I think that in that sense, it's not that we're more government or less government, I'm just for government, because that is an essential part of our responsibility.
Okay, Randy?
I would say the biggest thing we need to understand there is what is your perspective or what is your thoughts of government? So as a whole, and we go back and look at our code of ordinances here and the things that the council and the mayor are responsible for, code enforcement is part of it. So you just can't have the whole body and take the right arm off. You've got to have the whole body, and it's the same way with local government. Continued enforcement on, even to a minor degree, on some of the codes that we have on record right now will actually help us with some of the blight issues and housing issues that we have. There's one reason why developers aren't coming here. They don't know that they're going to get support from the locals with good ordinance enforcement when they bring new homes here. So you have to have some of that. Now let me say, going back in 2008, when property tax caps were enforced, we had to find a way, again, it's common sense, this isn't rocket science, and we're not doing brain surgery, but we had to figure out how we were gonna overcome a $500,000 loss in property tax caps with the new property tax caps that were put in on a $2 million budget. We were actually able to do that, and not only do that, but make those expenditures on Stellar and some other investments that the council had approved. And at the end of the day, at the end of my 8 years, we had a big surplus, over $11 million at one time. So that comes with becoming efficient in the way you provide your services. So as a government, we need to have all of the components of that government have to be working for us to actually help us in every area. But through those property tax caps, we have less people working at the city than we did at that point in time, and we're providing more services. So, I think it's a perspective. Is somebody wanting to get rid of codes and zoning and things like that, where if it's part of the whole piece, then you don't have 100% of what your government is all about.
Okay, time for wrap up. You take any questions? Oh, sure, if you want to, yes.
Yes, I'd like to ask Gail, when you indicated that the present administration is not required to do a budget on these certain departments, was your inference that they are not keeping track of what the departments are spending?
No, my information was coming from the fact that our current administration was actually asked that question by a council member in the city council meeting that I attended, whether or not they would be required. There were two departments that, whether or not they'd be required to have a budget, and he said probably not. So I was not inferring any wrongdoing. I was just explaining that the current administration has a certain standard, and the State Board of Accounts doesn't require those two departments to have. But my point was that you look at the bottom line at the end of the year, for all your departments, not just those two, and then you need to look at a budget for the following year, so that you're
then how
fiscally
would,
responsible.
if you were on the city council, how would you correct that?
I couldn't do it alone. I mean, I'm one of 5. I would make my wishes known that every department have to have a budget. That doesn't mean I'm gonna get what I want. That doesn't mean I'm not. I would just make my wishes known.
Okay, and then Randy, could you explain again how that works without the budgets? I didn't quite understand what you were saying, that if there's not a budget, there is still a way to track, of course, what the spending is, or?
The utilities, just like all of the other departments, the clerk treasurer, and whenever expenditures come in, they actually are put into a certain account, and you're going to have some of your overhead expenses with labor and things like that, and then you're going to get into equipment and fuel. It's, believe it or not, it's been 4 years, I couldn't tell you. Each one of those line items, there's probably 50 different entries on 5 different line items, but every expense, even in the utilities, actually has a line item that it is attached to. Leanne, is that correct?
That is correct.
So, we have history on what each one of those departments has had. I still have some of my information that I've had back when I was in the street department that goes back and shows what the history is on those expenditures. So you can forecast based on what happened last year and what happened the year before that, and you can use that as forecasting. It may not be budgeting, it may be more forecasting. And then you have your capital expense budget, which is a little bit separate from that, because you may be making capital expenses on something where you've bonded or borrowing money to make capital expenditures on a new addition or new lines or whatever it might be. Is completely separate from that. Or you may be doing a lift station replacement or something like that. So there's line items for everything, and you can break it all down. So it's not like doing your checkbook at home. You need to get engaged with department heads and the mayor to understand how that works. And it just does.
Yeah, so then Anita, do you feel like that, whether it's called budgeting or forecasting, they are still working within,
We're still working within parameters because they have a certain, income stream from the user fees, so, they happen to stay within certain, guidelines there. Would it be helpful to know where they are at the end of the year? I don't see that it, I think it could be certainly beneficial. I think in certainly some past councils, council members worked with the street department and other, perhaps with the water department, maybe another with waste department. So if that continues, then there is also a way to get feedback to the rest of the council from that kind of activity. So that's, I guess.
yeah, okay, thank you very much.